I never thought the woman sitting across from me would look at the waiter and say, "We're not paying for her." Those words were quiet, but they carried a weight I would never forget. My name is Margaret Collins, and that evening I learned that sometimes the deepest wounds do not come from strangers. They come from the people you believed would always stand beside you. I had lived in Charleston, South Carolina, for most of my life. At 74 years old, I had learned to appreciate simple things. A warm cup of coffee in the morning, the sound of birds outside my window, a phone call from someone I loved. After my husband passed away, I discovered that life became less about collecting things and more about holding on to meaningful moments. That was why I was so happy when my son David invited me to dinner. He told me it would be a special family evening at a beautiful restaurant downtown. I spent the afternoon choosing what to wear, not because I wanted to impress anyone, but because family gatherings still mattered to me. I wanted to feel included. I wanted to feel like I belonged. When I arrived, David and his wife Amanda were already sitting at the table. The restaurant was elegant, with soft lighting and neatly arranged tables. I smiled when I saw them because, despite everything, seeing my son still brought me happiness. Amanda greeted me politely, but I noticed something familiar in her expression. It was the same distance I had felt growing between us over the past few years. She was never openly unkind. That would have been easier to understand. Instead, it was the small things. The shorter conversations. The fewer invitations. The way she sometimes spoke about my age as if getting older meant I had less to contribute. I try not to take it personally. I reminded myself that everyone was busy. Everyone had responsibilities. But deep inside, I wondered if I was becoming someone they included out of duty instead of love. During dinner, I focused on the good moments. I listened to David talk about work. I laughed when my grandchildren sent messages about their day. I asked Amanda about her latest projects because I genuinely cared about her life. I never wanted to be the kind of mother-in-law who expected special treatment. I only wanted kindness and respect. For years, I had supported David in ways he probably never realized. When he was younger, I helped him through difficult times. I encouraged him when he doubted himself. I stood beside him because that is what parents do. Love is not something you give while keeping a record of what you are owed. Love is simply something you give. As the evening continued, I noticed Amanda checking the time several times. I ignored it. I did not want to assume the worst. Then the waiter arrived with the bill. I reached for my purse, prepared to handle my share. Before I could say anything, Amanda looked at the waiter and spoke calmly. "We're not paying for her." For a moment, I thought I had misunderstood. The noise of the restaurant seemed to disappear. The waiter looked surprised. David looked uncomfortable. And I sat there quietly, trying to understand how a simple family dinner had become a moment where I felt like a stranger. I could have argued. I could have asked why, but I chose silence. Not because I had nothing to say, but because I wanted to see the truth clearly. I wanted to know if this was just an awkward moment or if it revealed something deeper about how they truly saw me. I slowly placed my purse on the table and looked at the faces of the people I loved. They did not know that I had spent years making decisions that protected this family. They did not know the sacrifices behind the quiet life they saw. They did not know the full story of the woman sitting beside them. Then the waiter picked up the bill, looked at it carefully, and his expression changed. He glanced at me and said, "Mrs. Collins, there is something you should know before we continue." At that moment, I realized this dinner was about to reveal much more than a misunderstanding over a bill. It was about to reveal the truth about who I was and everything my family had failed to see. After the waiter stepped away from the table, I sat quietly and tried to understand what had just happened. I had spent my entire life believing that family moments were built on trust and kindness. I never expected that one sentence from someone I loved would make me question my place in my own family. But as I looked at David and Amanda sitting across from me, I realized there were things I had ignored for a long time. Small moments I had dismissed. Conversations that ended too quickly. Invitations that stopped coming. I had always found reasons to explain their distance because I wanted to believe the best about them. I wanted to believe that busy schedules and changing lives were the reasons we were becoming less connected. I did not want to believe that I was slowly becoming someone they only remembered when they needed something. The truth was, I had spent years making life easier for my family without expecting recognition. When David was younger, I was the person he called when he needed guidance. When he started his own family, I offered support whenever I could. I never saw those things as sacrifices because loving my son came naturally. But somewhere along the way, the balance changed. The person who once needed my help began seeing my presence as something inconvenient. I remembered moments that suddenly felt different. The time Amanda mentioned that older people sometimes had trouble understanding modern life. The way she would politely listen to my opinions, but rarely consider them. The way family plans were sometimes made without asking if I wanted to be included. None of those moments seemed important by themselves. But together, they created a feeling I could not ignore. I was not angry. I was disappointed. There is a difference. Anger makes you want someone to feel your pain. Disappointment makes you wonder why the people you love did not notice it already. As I sat there waiting for the waiter to return, I thought about the woman I had become after my husband passed away. I had learned to stand on my own. I had learned that being alone did not mean being forgotten. I had built a peaceful life in my home, surrounded by memories and the lessons I carried from the past. I never needed my family to take care of me. I only wanted them to remember that I was still part of their lives. Then the waiter returned with a folder in his hand. He approached the table carefully and looked at David and Amanda before speaking. "Mrs. Collins, I believe there has been a misunderstanding," he said. I looked at him, waiting. This reservation was arranged with specific instructions, and there is information here that should be shared with everyone at this table. Amanda's expression changed slightly. David looked confused. Neither of them understood what was happening. The waiter placed the folder near me, but did not open it. "I think it is important that you see this first," he said. I reached toward the folder slowly. For years, I had kept certain parts of my life private. Not because I wanted secrets, but because I never wanted my family to treat me differently because of what I had accomplished. I wanted their love to be real. I wanted their respect to come from knowing my heart, not knowing my circumstances. But now, sitting in that restaurant, I realized the truth had a way of appearing when people least expected it. I looked at David, then at Amanda. This was not about a bill anymore. It was about every assumption they had made about me. It was about every time they underestimated me because they only saw the quiet woman in front of them. I opened the folder and prepared myself to finally let them see the part of my story I had kept hidden for so long. When I opened the folder sitting on the restaurant table, I knew there was no going back. For years, I had kept certain parts of my life private because I never wanted anyone to treat me differently. I believe family should be built on love, not on what someone owns or what they can provide. But in that moment, after hearing my own daughter-in-law say those words about me, I realized that silence had allowed people to create a story about me that was not true. The first page inside the folder was a document connected to the restaurant reservation. I looked at it carefully, trying to understand why the waiter believed this information mattered. Then I saw my name written clearly at the top. The restaurant manager had been instructed to make sure I was treated with respect during the evening. It was not about the cost of dinner. It was about something much deeper. The waiter explained that the restaurant had a special connection to a project I had quietly supported years earlier. I had never told David or Amanda because I did not want recognition. I had helped a local community program that provided opportunities for young people and families in Charleston. Over time, that support became something meaningful to many people, but I never considered it something worth talking about at family gatherings. To me, kindness was not something you announced. It was something you simply did. I looked across the table at David. His expression had changed. He was no longer uncomfortable because of an awkward dinner. He was beginning to understand that there was a part of my life he had never taken the time to discover. Amanda remained quiet. I could tell she was trying to process everything. The truth was not that I had hidden something from them to surprise them. I had simply lived my life without needing applause. The waiter continued explaining that the reservation had been arranged because the restaurant wanted to honor my years of dedication to the community. They had planned a small acknowledgement at the end of dinner, but the situation at the table had changed everything. I listened quietly because I did not want this moment to become about proving Amanda wrong. That was never my goal. I did not want her to feel embarrassed. I wanted her to understand something much more important. A person should never be judged before knowing their full story. "Mom," David finally said softly, "I had no idea." I looked at him and replied, "That is because you never asked." My words were not meant to hurt him. They were simply the truth. Sometimes people do not fail to appreciate someone because they are cruel. Sometimes they fail because they become too comfortable. They assume they already know everything about a person they have known for years. David looked down at the table. I could see regret in his expression. He started remembering moments from the past. Moments when he was too busy to call. Moments when he assumed I was fine because I always appeared strong. Amanda finally spoke. "Margaret, I think I misunderstood you." I looked at her. For the first time that evening, there was no defensiveness in her voice. There was honesty. "I thought because you lived a quiet life, you did not have much going on anymore," she continued. I was wrong. I took a slow breath. I had imagined many different reactions to the truth being revealed. Anger, surprise, questions. But I never wanted their sympathy. Sympathy disappears quickly. Respect lasts longer. "Amanda," I said, "everyone has a story. The problem is that we often judge people before we take the time to listen." The table became quiet again, but this silence felt different. It was not the uncomfortable silence from earlier. It was the kind of silence where people were thinking, reflecting, and finally seeing each other clearly. For the first time in a long time, my family was not looking at me as someone they needed to include out of obligation. They were beginning to see me as a person with a lifetime of experiences, choices, and memories that mattered. After that evening at the restaurant, I thought things would immediately feel different, but real change rarely happens in a single moment. A person can understand the truth and still need time to accept what it means. That was what happened with my family. The dinner revealed something important, but the days that followed showed whether those lessons would truly remain. When I returned home that night, I sat in my quiet living room and looked around at the memories I had collected over the years. Photographs of my husband and me. Pictures of David when he was young. Moments from birthdays, holidays, and family gatherings. I realized that my life had never been defined by what others knew about me. It had always been defined by the love I had given and the choices I had made. The next morning, I received a call from David. I expected him to ask about the restaurant or explain what happened, but instead, he simply said, "Mom, can I come by and talk?" When he arrived, he looked different. Not physically, but emotionally. He seemed like someone carrying a heavy thought. We sat at my kitchen table, the same table where he had done homework as a child and where I had listened to his dreams when he was young. "I owe you an apology," he said. I stayed quiet and let him continue. "I think I spent so many years seeing you only as my mother that I forgot you were a person with your own life. I knew you took care of me, but I never stopped to think about everything you built for yourself." His words meant more to me than he realized. I did not need him to feel guilty forever. I needed him to understand. "David," I said, "being your mother was one of the greatest joys of my life. But I was also Margaret before I became your mother. I had dreams, challenges, and experiences that shaped who I am." He nodded slowly. "I think I forgot that." We spent the next few hours talking about things we had never discussed before. I told him stories about my early years, about the decisions I made after his father and I started our family, and about the moments when I had to be stronger than I thought I could be. For the first time, my son was not just listening because I was his mother. He was listening because he wanted to know me. A few days later, Amanda called. I was surprised because she usually sent messages instead of calling. When I answered, there was a long pause before she spoke. "Margaret, I have been thinking about everything," she said. "I want you to know that I am sorry. I listened carefully. I judged you without knowing your whole story. I thought I understood your life because I saw the quiet parts, but I never asked about the parts one did not see." I appreciated her honesty. It takes courage for someone to admit they were wrong. "Amanda," I said, "everyone makes mistakes. What matters is what we choose to do after we recognize them." She told me something that stayed with me. I think I confused independence with not needing anyone. But now I understand that every person still wants to feel valued. Her words showed me that she was beginning to see what I had always hoped my family would understand. Respect is not about age. It is not about money. It is about recognizing that every person has a story worth hearing. Over the next few weeks, I noticed small changes. David called more often. Amanda asked about my opinions instead of assuming she already knew my thoughts. They began inviting me into conversations that I had once been left out of. These were simple things, but simple things often reveal the biggest changes. I did not need a grand apology or a dramatic gesture. I needed consistency. I needed to know that the lesson from that evening would continue after the emotions faded. And slowly, I began to see that my family was not just apologizing for what happened. They were learning how to see me differently. In the weeks after that dinner, I began to understand that rebuilding a family relationship is not about changing the past. The past cannot be erased. The words that were spoken cannot be taken back. But people can choose what they do after those moments. They can choose to learn, to listen, and to become better versions of themselves. That was the journey my family had started. I noticed that David was making an effort in ways I had not seen before. He no longer called only when something needed to be handled. Sometimes he called just to ask how my day was going. Sometimes he stopped by with coffee and sat with me at the kitchen table, talking about ordinary things. Those simple moments meant more to me than he probably understood. For many years, I had believed that being a good mother meant always being available, always helping, and always putting others first. I never regretted loving my family that way. But I also learned something important. Love should not mean disappearing as a person. A mother can care deeply for her children and still deserve to be seen, heard, and respected. Amanda's changes were slower, but they were meaningful. I noticed that she was not trying to make a dramatic apology or prove something to me. Instead, she was making small choices that showed she was thinking differently. One afternoon, she invited me to lunch at a little cafe near her office. As we sat together, she asked me questions about my life that she had never asked before. "Margaret, what was your first job?" she asked. I smiled because it was such a simple question, but it carried so much meaning. For years, she had known me only as David's mother. She had never taken the time to know the woman I was before that role. I told her about my younger years, the challenges I faced, and the dreams I once had. I shared stories about my husband and the life we built together. I told her about moments when I had to make difficult decisions and moments when I was proud of the choices I made. Amanda listened carefully. She did not interrupt. She did not compare my experiences to her own. She simply listened. At the end of our lunch, she looked at me and said, "I wish I had asked these questions sooner." I smiled gently. Sometimes people are not ready to hear a story until they realize they never knew the whole story. She nodded. I think I only saw what was in front of me. I never thought about everything behind it. That conversation stayed with me because it showed real growth. Anyone can say sorry, but understanding requires effort. It requires someone to step outside their own perspective and consider another person's feelings. A few months later, our family gathered for a holiday dinner. This time, the atmosphere felt completely different from that night at the restaurant. There was no tension. There was no feeling that anyone was simply attending because they had to. We were together because we wanted to be. During dinner, my grandson asked me to tell a story about his grandfather. Everyone at the table became interested, and I realized something beautiful. The stories I carried were not just memories. They were pieces of our family history. They connected generations. After dinner, David helped me carry dishes into the kitchen. He smiled and said, "Mom, I think I spent too much time thinking about what you did for us and not enough time appreciating who you are." I looked at him and felt a quiet sense of peace. That was the thing I had wanted all along. Not recognition for my accomplishments. Not praise for the things I had given. Just the simple understanding that I was still here, still growing, and still someone worth knowing. Looking back, I realized that the dinner at the restaurant was not the end of my relationship with my family. It was the beginning of a more honest one. Sometimes people need a difficult moment to see what they have been missing. And sometimes the greatest change happens when people finally stop assuming they know someone and start taking the time to truly understand them. After the holiday dinner, I started noticing something I had not expected. My family was not just being kinder because they felt guilty about what happened at the restaurant. They were genuinely changing the way they looked at me. That difference mattered. Apologies can come from a moment of emotion, but true change appears in everyday actions. And slowly, through those small actions, I began to feel that I was no longer standing outside my own family looking in. One morning, David called and asked if I would help him organize some old family photographs. He said he had found boxes in his garage that had been untouched for years. When I arrived, we sat together on the floor surrounded by albums, letters, and memories from different chapters of our lives. As we looked through the pictures, David smiled at moments he had almost forgotten. There were photos from his childhood, family vacations, school events, and simple days that had seemed ordinary at the time. "Mom, I cannot believe how much you did," he said quietly. I looked at the pictures and smiled. Most parents do those things because they love their children. They do not do them expecting recognition. He nodded, but I could tell he was thinking deeply. I think that is what I never understood. I saw the results, but I did not see the effort behind them. His words reminded me that many misunderstandings in families happen because people see what is visible but miss everything that happens behind the scenes. They see a finished home, but not the work that built it. They see a confident person, but not the challenges that shaped them. They see a parent who always seems strong and forget that strong people need appreciation too. Later that week, Amanda invited me to attend a community event with her. It was the same kind of work I had quietly supported for years, and I was surprised when she told me she wanted to learn more about it. I realized something, she said as we drove together. I spent so much time thinking about what people could do for me that I forgot to ask what they had already done for others. I appreciated her honesty. The Amanda sitting beside me was different from the woman at the restaurant. She was no longer trying to defend her assumptions. She was questioning them. At the event, I introduced her to people I had known for many years. She listened as they shared stories about projects, families, and opportunities that had been created through years of cooperation. I watched her expression change as she began to understand that a quiet life can still have a powerful impact. On the drive home, Amanda said, "Margaret, I think I confused being private with having nothing to offer." I looked out the window and thought about how many people experience the same thing. Sometimes the world notices the loudest voices and overlooks the quiet ones. But quiet does not mean empty. It often means there is a lifetime of experiences waiting to be discovered. Over the next few months, our family continued building new traditions. We started having regular dinners where everyone shared stories instead of simply talking about schedules and responsibilities. I enjoyed those evenings because they reminded me that family is not only about being related by blood or marriage. It is about making the effort to understand one another. One evening, David asked me a question that stayed with me. "Mom, do you think things would have been different if that dinner had never happened?" I thought about it carefully. "Maybe," I said. "Sometimes people do not realize what they are missing until something forces them to look closer. But the important thing is what we choose to do after we see the truth." David smiled. "I am glad we got another chance." I was too. Because the greatest gift was not that my family discovered something unexpected about me. The greatest gift was that they finally became curious about the woman they thought they already knew. And that curiosity opened the door to something much more valuable than any possession or achievement. It opened the door to understanding. As the months passed, I began to notice that my family was no longer trying to fix one painful moment. They were building a new relationship with me, one choice at a time. That was the difference between temporary regret and genuine change. The dinner at the restaurant had opened their eyes, but what happened afterward showed me whether they truly understood the lesson. I did not need my family to constantly apologize for what happened. I needed them to understand why it hurt and how important it was to see people before judging them. One afternoon, David came to my house with an old wooden box that belonged to his father. He placed it on the kitchen table and smiled. "I found this while cleaning the attic," he said. "I thought you would want to look through it." Inside were letters, old photographs, and small reminders of the life we had built together. As I looked through those memories, I felt grateful for every chapter of my journey. There were difficult moments, but there were also countless moments filled with love. David picked up a photograph of our family from many years ago. "I remember this day," he said. "You worked so hard to make everything special." I smiled. "I was just doing what I thought was right." He shook his head. "That is exactly what I mean. You always made things look easy, so I never understood how much effort was behind everything." His words reminded me of something I had learned throughout my life. The people who care for others often become invisible because they make their love look natural. Their sacrifices become part of everyday life, and people sometimes forget that those sacrifices were choices made out of love. Later that week, Amanda visited me. She brought a small gift, but what mattered more was the conversation we had. She sat with me in the living room and asked about my dreams when I was younger. It was a question I never expected from her. For so long, our conversations had focused on family events, responsibilities, and practical matters. She had never asked about the person I was before becoming a wife and mother. "I want to know your story," she said. "Not just the parts connected to our family." I appreciated those words because they showed a change in the way she saw me. She was no longer looking at me only through my relationship with David. She was seeing me as Margaret, a woman who had lived a full life before anyone called me mother or grandmother. I told her about my first apartment, my early career, and the dreams I had when I was young. I told her about the lessons I learned from my parents and the moments that shaped my understanding of family. Amanda listened with genuine interest. I think I made assumptions about you, she admitted. I thought because you were quiet, you did not have strong opinions. I thought because you did not talk about your accomplishments, there were not many to talk about. I smiled gently. Many people make that mistake. They think what they see is the whole story. She nodded. I understand that now. That conversation became a turning point in our relationship. We did not suddenly become completely different people. We still had different personalities and different ways of looking at life. But we had something we did not have before. We had respect. We had curiosity. We had the willingness to understand instead of assume. Around that time, my grandchildren started asking me more questions about the past. They wanted to hear stories about their grandfather and about the family before they were born. I loved sharing those memories because I realized something important. Every person carries a collection of experiences that cannot be seen from the outside. A quiet person may carry decades of wisdom. An older person may carry lessons that took a lifetime to learn. A family member who seems ordinary may have a story that changes how you see them forever. Looking back, I realized that the greatest change in my family did not come from discovering what I had achieved. It came from discovering who I had always been. And that was something no document, number, or possession could ever fully explain. Over time, I realized that the greatest change in my family was not something that happened overnight. It was a collection of small moments that slowly rebuilt the connection we had almost lost. Trust is not restored through one conversation. It is restored through consistent actions, through patience, and through the decision to treat each other differently every day. That was what I began to see in David and Amanda. They were not trying to erase the past. They were creating a better future. One Sunday afternoon, David invited me to join him and Amanda for lunch at their home. When I arrived, I noticed something immediately. I was not being treated like a guest who needed to be accommodated. I felt like a member of the family who was genuinely wanted there. Amanda had prepared some of my favorite dishes, including a recipe I had once shared with her years earlier. It was a small detail, but it showed me that she had been paying attention. During lunch, we talked about ordinary things. Work, family plans, and memories from the past. But there was a comfort in the conversation that had not existed before. Nobody was carefully choosing words. Nobody was trying to avoid difficult subjects. We were simply enjoying being together. After lunch, Amanda asked if I could help her organize some family photos. As we looked through old albums, she stopped at a picture of David as a young boy. I never knew this side of him, she said. I smiled because I understood what she meant. There are parts of every person's life that only certain people have witnessed. A mother sees the child before the world sees the adult. She sees the struggles, the fears, the dreams, and the moments that shape someone's character. You know, Amanda said, I think I spent years only seeing David as my husband. I forgot that he was once someone's little boy. Her words made me smile. She was beginning to understand something important. Family relationships are not just about the roles people have today. They are also about the history that brought everyone together. Later that afternoon, we sat outside on the porch. The neighborhood was quiet, and the warm South Carolina breeze reminded me of how much life had changed. Amanda looked at me and said, Margaret, I want to ask you something. When everything happened at the restaurant, why did you stay so calm? I thought about her question before answering, because I have learned that people often reveal more about themselves when you give them space. I did not want to react with anger. I wanted to understand what was truly happening. She nodded slowly. I think I would have handled it differently. I smiled. Maybe, but everyone has moments they are not proud of. What matters is what they do after they recognize them. That conversation meant a lot to me because I could see that Amanda was no longer trying to defend herself. She was learning from the experience. She was becoming more thoughtful about the way her words and actions affected others. As the months continued, our family created new traditions. Once a month, we gathered for dinner and shared stories from our lives. Sometimes we talked about funny memories. Sometimes we discussed lessons we had learned. Sometimes we simply enjoyed each other's company. I loved those evenings because they reminded me that family is not strengthened by perfection. It is strengthened by effort. It is strengthened when people are willing to admit mistakes and choose kindness afterward. One evening, my granddaughter asked me why I kept so many old photographs. I told her, because every picture represents a moment when someone mattered. Memories remind us to appreciate people while we still have the chance. She smiled and said, I think everyone should hear that. I agreed with her. Because the truth is, many people spend their lives waiting to tell someone they appreciate them. They assume there will always be more time. But relationships are built in the moments we choose to create. Looking back, I no longer saw that difficult evening as the moment my family disappointed me. I saw it as the moment that encouraged all of us to become better. It reminded us that every person deserves to be seen, not just for what they provide, but for who they truly are. And after everything we experienced, my family finally understood the lesson I had carried all my life. Love means more when it is accompanied by respect. When I look back at the evening that changed my family forever, I no longer remember it as a moment of rejection. I remember it as the moment when we were finally given the opportunity to truly see each other. Life has a way of showing us lessons in unexpected ways. Sometimes those lessons arrive through joy. Sometimes they arrive through disappointment. But the most important thing is what we choose to do after we learn them. For me, the greatest lesson was understanding that being valued is not about being needed. It is about being respected. For many years, I measured my role in my family by how much I could do for others. I was the person who helped, supported, encouraged, and quietly carried responsibilities without asking for anything in return. I never regretted those choices because they came from love. But I eventually learned that love should never require someone to become invisible. Every person deserves to be recognized as an individual, no matter their age or stage of life. Today, my relationship with David and Amanda is stronger than it has ever been. Not because we forgot what happened, but because we learned from it. We became more honest with each other. We started having conversations we should have had years earlier. We stopped assuming we knew everything about one another and started asking questions instead. That simple change made a bigger difference than I could have imagined. David often visits me now just to spend time together. Sometimes we talk about important things. Sometimes we sit quietly and enjoy a cup of coffee. I have learned that some of the most meaningful moments in life are the ordinary ones. A conversation, a shared laugh, a reminder that someone cares. Amanda and I also built a relationship I never thought was possible. I do not expect her to be perfect, and she does not expect me to be perfect. We are two different people from different generations who have learned how to appreciate each other. She asks about my experiences, and I listen to her challenges. We have discovered that understanding does not require us to be the same. It only requires us to respect each other. My grandchildren have also become a beautiful part of this new chapter. They ask me questions about my past, and I love sharing my memories with them. I want them to understand that every person they meet carries a story they may never see. The elderly neighbor they pass every day may have accomplished incredible things. The quiet person in the room may have faced challenges they never talk about. Everyone has a journey that deserves compassion. Looking back, I realized that I spent years worrying that my family did not see my value. But the truth is, I also needed to remember my own value. A person's worth does not disappear because others fail to recognize it immediately. It does not depend on approval, attention, or recognition. It exists because every life has meaning. That difficult dinner showed me something I will never forget. People can misunderstand you. They can make assumptions. They can overlook the things that make you special. But you should never allow someone else's misunderstanding to define who you are. I am still the same woman I was before that evening. I am still Margaret Collins. I am still a mother, a grandmother, and a person with memories, dreams, and lessons to share. The difference is that now my family sees me more clearly. They no longer see only what I can provide. They see the person behind everything I have done. And that is the greatest gift anyone can receive. Not a possession, not a title, not a promise. Simply the feeling of being truly seen. In the end, that was all I ever wanted.